All right, let's get into it. Today we're tackling a really interesting question, one that I think a lot of people have pondered at some point. Do all religions ultimately lead to God?
It's definitely a question that's been around for ages.
Yeah. And get this, a recent survey found that a surprising number of people actually believe that multiple religions can lead to the same, divine endpoint.
Oh, wow. How many are we talking?
2/3.
Wow, that many.
Yeah. And even more surprising, half of those folks identified as Christian.
Huh. So even within Christianity, there's this openness to the idea of multiple paths.
Exactly. So there are a lot of folks open to that idea of many paths up the same mountain,
Hmm.
right? But what about those who believe there's only one way?
Yeah, that's a whole other perspective.
Totally. And that's what we're diving into today. We're going to be looking at a source that tackles this question from a distinctly Christian viewpoint.
That'll be really interesting to unpack. This question has divided people for centuries, hasn't it?
It really has.
Yeah.
And as we go through this source's argument, it's super important for us to remember that we're not here to endorse any one belief system.
Right, right. Of course. We're here to understand, not to judge.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides on this deep dive into the source material. No judgment, just exploration.
I like that. Guides on an adventure.
An intellectual and spiritual adventure.
Love it.
So this source, it jumps right in with a really powerful statement. It quotes something Jesus says in the Gospel of John.
Oh, which one?
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Wow, that's a pretty direct claim right off the bat.
Right. It's basically saying that Jesus is the only way to God.
Yeah.
And that definitely raises questions for those who believe in a more inclusive, approach to spirituality.
For sure. Like, why would a loving God limit access in that way?
Exactly. And what about those who have never even heard of Jesus?
Right, those are big questions.
Huge questions. And these ideas about exclusivity, it's something the source really tackles head on. But before we even get into that, I think it's important for us to understand how this source is defining religion in the first place.
Yeah, good point. We need a shared understanding of that term before we can really dig in.
So how does it define it?
Well, it defines religion as any belief system and set of practices that are related to spirituality and moral values.
Okay, so pretty broad. Basically anything related to spirituality and morality.
Yeah, pretty much. But then, and here's where it gets interesting, the source makes a distinction between just religion and actually having a personal relationship with God, specifically through Jesus.
So you can be religious without actually having that deep connection.
That's exactly what the source is arguing.
Interesting.
And to make that point even stronger, it uses this phrase that might sound kind of harsh at first, religion without relationship.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty direct.
Right. It's saying that just following rules, going to services, or even identifying with a specific religion doesn't automatically mean you have a genuine connection with God.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get where this is going. It's kind of like saying you can go through the motions of a friendship without actually having a deep bond with that person.
Right. Perfect analogy.
Like,
That's exactly what the source is getting at. Think about it. Can you really be close friends with someone you never talk to, share experiences with, or really open up to?
No, not really. You'd just be acquaintances, I guess.
Right. And the source is basically saying the same principle applies to our relationship with God. It can't just be about outward actions. It needs to be about that inner connection, that back and forth, that shared experience.
So more about quality than quantity.
Exactly. Quality over quantity.
Makes sense.
And to illustrate this whole idea, the source draws on a really vivid passage from the Bible, from the book of Matthew.
Oh, is this where we get to that narrow gate and wide gate analogy?
Yes. You got it.
I've heard that one before, but I'm excited to hear how this source uses it.
Me too. It's a powerful one for sure.
Definitely.
So basically, the source paints this picture of these two gates, right? And at first glance, both of them seem appealing. They both seem to promise, happiness and fulfillment. But here's the catch.
Okay, there's got to be a catch.
Only one of these gates actually leads to the destination, to where you actually want to go. The other one, even though it might seem tempting, ends up leading to destruction.
Ooh, okay. That's a classic dilemma. Which path do you choose when they both seem promising at the start?
Exactly. It's that fork in the road. And the source is suggesting that a lot of people choose the wider, easier path, maybe even without realizing it.
It's easy to see why. We naturally gravitate toward what seems easier, right?
Totally. But even though it might seem like the obvious choice at the time, it ends up leading them astray.
Oh man, that raises a big question for me. How do you even know which gate to choose in the first place?
Right. Like if they both seem so promising, how can you tell which is the real deal?
Exactly. That's where things get tricky. That's where discernment comes in. And the source admits it's not always easy to figure out.
I can imagine, especially today, right? There's so many different churches and denominations and spiritual practices out there. It's a lot.
It really is. It's easy to get confused or even misled.
Mm.
And, as we mentioned before, even within Christianity itself, there's a whole range of beliefs and practices.
That's so true. So it's not just about picking a religion. It's about really understanding what it teaches and making a conscious choice about what you believe.
You got it. It's about being active in your faith,
Yeah.
not just inheriting it or passively following tradition.
So it's less about just joining a group and more about really seeking truth for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And that's a journey, isn't it?
It really is. And it sounds like this source is all about encouraging that journey, even if it's not always easy.
It definitely is. It's about engaging your mind, your heart, your whole self in that search for something deeper.
Something that truly resonates with your soul.
Yes, exactly. That's powerful. And I think it's a great place for us to pause for now.
Yeah, let's take a break and come back to this. There's so much more to unpack in this source.
There really is so much to think about. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive.
It's a journey that can be really challenging. And, this source doesn't shy away from those challenges. It even goes so far as to say that Satan has created so many false systems of religion.
Whoa, okay. That's pretty intense language right
Yeah.
there. It sounds like the source is suggesting there's a spiritual battle going on, a clash between good and evil, truth and deception.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme that runs through this source. It's this idea that there are forces at play that we might not even be aware of, trying to pull us in different directions.
So it's not just about being smart or informed. It's about having this kind of spiritual radar, being attuned to those subtle energies that might be leading us toward truth or trying to steer us off course.
Exactly. It's about discernment on a deeper level. Recognizing that things aren't always as they seem.
Right. Like not all that glitters is gold. And some paths, even if they seem really appealing at first, might actually lead us away from where we really want to go.
Exactly. And so the question becomes, how do we develop that spiritual radar? How do we learn to distinguish between what's genuine and what's deceptive?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, how do we avoid getting tricked? How do we know what to trust?
Well, the source points us back to the teachings of Jesus, specifically to something he says in the Gospel of Matthew.
Oh, what's that?
Ask, seek, knock.
3 simple words. But they seem to pack a punch, don't they?
They really do. They're all about taking action.
But what does that actually look like, in our lives? How do we ask, seek, knock when we're trying to figure out these big spiritual questions?
Well, the source connects these words with prayer. It's about approaching God with humility, honesty, and a genuine desire for connection.
So asking might be like pouring out our hearts to God, expressing our doubts, our hopes, everything.
Exactly. Acknowledging our need for guidance and seeking wisdom from a higher source.
And what about seeking? Does that mean studying scripture, exploring different spiritual traditions, or just paying attention to those moments of synchronicity, those little signs that seem to pop up in our lives?
All of the above. It's about being an active participant in your own spiritual growth. Not waiting for enlightenment to hit you, but actively searching for it. Being curious, open-minded, and willing to learn.
So it's about reading, reflecting, exploring, experimenting, becoming a spiritual detective of sorts.
I love that, a spiritual detective. It's about approaching your spiritual journey with that same sense of curiosity, that willingness to follow the clues wherever they may lead.
That's a great way to think about it. And what about knocking? What would that look like in a practical sense?
Knocking is all about taking action. It's about stepping outside your comfort zone and putting your faith into practice.
It's about bridging the gap between belief and action, making choices that reflect what you believe.
Exactly. It's about allowing your faith to become a driving force in your life, shaping your decisions, and inspiring you to make a difference in the world.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But, I have to admit, this source puts a lot of emphasis on having a relationship with Jesus. And for someone who didn't grow up in the Christian faith, or maybe is skeptical of organized religion, that might be a little off-putting.
That's a really valid point, and I think that's a hurdle for a lot of people when it comes to exploring spirituality. But what the source is trying to highlight is the transformative power of that personal encounter with Jesus.
So it's not about blindly accepting a bunch of rules or doctrines. It's about that inner transformation, that shift in perspective, that feeling of being loved and accepted unconditionally.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the source argues that this can profoundly impact your life.
So it's about that inner shift, that connection to something bigger than yourself that gives your life meaning.
Precisely.
This whole conversation reminds me of something I read about the psychology of belief, how our brains are actually wired to seek out meaning and connection. It's in our nature to try and make sense of the world and our place in it.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. It makes sense, though, doesn't it? It's like we have this innate drive to understand where we fit in.
Totally. And I think that's a big part of why religion in all its different forms has played such a significant role in human history, right? It offers us a framework for understanding the big questions, a sense of belonging, and a way to connect with something beyond ourselves.
Absolutely. It helps us grapple with those big existential questions that we all face.
So whether you're drawn to Christianity or some other spiritual tradition, that underlying need for meaning, for connection, it seems like a universal thread.
I agree. It's something that connects us all.
Now, I'm curious about something the source says. It states pretty boldly that no religion leads to God. And that seems like a pretty strong statement, especially in a world where a lot of people find meaning and purpose in different spiritual paths.
It is a strong statement. And it's important to keep in mind that this source is coming from a specific viewpoint, a particular understanding of Christian theology. It's not meant to be a judgment on other faiths, but rather a statement about how this source sees the Christian path.
So it's not about saying other religions are wrong. It's about emphasizing what this source sees as unique about the Christian message.
Exactly. And it highlights what it sees as distinctive about Christianity, especially its emphasis on grace and forgiveness received through a relationship with Jesus.
Okay, I can see that. But it still raises questions for me. Like, how does this perspective line up with the idea of a loving God who embraces everyone?
Right. Those are questions that theologians and philosophers have debated for ages. And this source doesn't dive super deep into those questions, but it does give us a few hints.
Oh, okay. What kind of hints?
Well, for one, it really stresses that God's love is offered to everyone, no matter what they believe or what they've done.
So it's saying that God's love is universal, even if this source believes that salvation comes through a specific relationship with Jesus.
That's right. And it suggests that God's love is what motivates him to reach out to humanity and offer a way back to him through Jesus.
I see. So it's kind of like a parent who loves their child unconditionally, even if the child makes different choices.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I think that really captures what the source is getting at.
Now, we talked earlier about this idea of religion without relationship, and it seems like the source really wants to draw a clear line between just following religious rules and rituals and actually having that deep connection with God.
Definitely. It's an important distinction.
But what does religion without relationship actually look like in practice?
Well, it's subtle but important. What it means is that you can go through all the motions of being religious, right? You can go to services, perform rituals, even say you believe certain things, but without engaging your heart or letting those practices change you on the inside, it's not enough.
So it's like going through the motions of a workout, but not really pushing yourself. You might look like you're working hard, but you're not getting the full benefit.
Exactly. And the source is saying that real spiritual growth needs more than outward actions. It needs an internal transformation, a shift in your heart and mind so that your actions and your beliefs line up.
So it's not about doing the right things, but about doing them with the right intentions.
Yes. It's about cultivating that sense of authenticity and genuine connection with God so that your faith becomes a source of joy and meaning.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap of religion without relationship? How do we make sure our faith isn't just about empty rituals?
The source would say it goes back to that call to ask, seek, knock. It's about approaching your faith with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to go deeper.
So being willing to ask tough questions, to dig beneath the surface and see what's really there.
Exactly. It's about engaging your mind, your heart, your whole being in that pursuit of something more.
Something that really speaks to your soul.
Yes. And it's a journey that can be challenging. But according to the source, it's a journey worth taking.
I can see that.
And it's a journey we don't have to take alone. It really is. And that sense of community, of shared purpose, that's something the source really emphasizes.
It's interesting. We often think of spirituality as this very personal, individual thing. But this source seems to be saying that it's also about being part of something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we can learn and grow from each other, and that we can support and encourage one another on our spiritual journeys.
So it's about finding those people who can help us navigate the tricky parts, who can challenge us to grow, and who can celebrate those moments of insight and breakthrough with us.
Exactly. And, even though ultimately it's up to each of us to choose our own path, having that kind of support system can make all the difference.
That's a really beautiful thought. So we've talked about so much in this deep dive, about aligning our beliefs with Jesus' teachings, but also recognizing that's just one perspective, and about being actor-seekers, knocking on doors of understanding.
We've talked about the importance of having that personal relationship with God and how it can be so transformative.
And about all those challenges we might face along the way, about needing to be discerning, navigating a world full of different spiritual ideas.
Right. And about that practical advice to ask, seek, knock, to never stop searching, never stop learning, and to always be open to new insights.
It's been a really amazing journey exploring this source's perspective on faith. But as we wrap things up, I'm curious, what are some key things that really resonated with you as we've delved into this material?
I think what really hit home for me was the source's emphasis on the transformative power of that personal relationship with God. It's not just about believing certain things or following rules. It's about experiencing a deep connection that changes you on the inside.
It's about letting that connection shape your values, your choices, and ultimately how you live your life.
Exactly. And I think that message is so important today. In a world where people are searching for meaning and purpose, for something beyond the everyday.
Now, the source talks about the importance of asking, seeking, knocking. But it also seems to warn us that there are right and wrong ways to go about this search.
That's true. It definitely cautions against just blindly accepting any teaching or following any path without really thinking it through.
It's kind of like choosing a hiking trail, right? You wouldn't just head off into the wilderness without a map, a compass, or any idea of where you're going.
That's such a good analogy. The source seems to be saying that the journey of faith requires preparation, guidance, and a willingness to use our discernment.
So we can't just wander around aimlessly hoping to stumble upon truth. We have to be intentional in our choices.
Absolutely. And that intentionality involves being open-minded, but also critical. We should explore new ideas, but always check them against our values and what feels authentic to us.
So it's about finding that balance, that middle ground between being open to new things, but also being discerning about what we choose to embrace.
Exactly. And part of that discernment process involves turning to trusted sources for guidance, whether it's mentors, spiritual teachers, or even just friends and family who share our values.
It's about building that network of support, recognizing that we don't have to go it alone on this journey.
Right. We can learn from each other, challenge each other, and celebrate the victories together.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
We've explored this source's unique perspective on whether all religions lead to God. We've talked about the importance of having a relationship with God and all the intricacies of that journey. And we've touched on so many important themes, like discernment, seeking guidance, and ultimately taking ownership of our own spiritual growth.
And we've learned about the power of asking, seeking, knocking. That call to be active in our faith and to keep searching for deeper meaning.
It's been a truly fascinating deep dive into this source's perspective. And as we close out our conversation today, what's one final thought you'd want to leave our listener with? What invitation would you extend to them as they continue their own journey of faith?
If this source sparked something in you, if it made you think or question or wonder, I'd encourage you to keep exploring those feelings. Dive deeper into those parts that resonated with you. Maybe explore those biblical passages we talked about, or even seek out conversations with people from different faith backgrounds, just to see what they believe, and how they approach these big questions.
I love that. And remember, this deep dive was just one perspective on a really complex topic. So keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking. You never know what incredible discoveries await you on your path.